The City is More Than Human, An Animal History of Seattle by Frederick L. Brown. Conclusion. In late August 2009, a cougar found his way into Seattle's Discovery Park, a creature descended perhaps from one of the cats whose killing Seattleites celebrated a century and a half earlier. Only the third cougar to run loose in the city since the 19th century, he may have followed the Greenbelt along the rail line from the north to this park of forests, meadows, and shoreline near the heart of the city. He entered a town transformed from the one his ancestors encountered when they stalked newcomers' cattle. He crossed residential streets where once forests stood. He encountered a human population dominated by the descendants of whites and other newcomers, while descendants of the area's original inhabitants were a small minority. By means of economic transformations and changing cultural expectations, humans had transformed the set of animals that inhabited that place, as well as the attitudes humans took toward them. It was no longer livestock, but pets that were principal non-human animals there. And so, this young male dined on neighborhood cats, not on sheep and cattle. A growing humane concern for animals, especially those that city people encountered as individuals, meant this cougar met a very different fate than his ancestors had. He was not killed and put on display. Rather, state fish and wildlife traffickers treated him using hound dogs and fired a tranquilizer early morning of Sunday, September 6th. He was last seen later that day trotting away into the Cascade foothills, pursued by a bear dog, an experience that biologists hope would increase the cougar's fear of an aversion to humans. He was a wild animal, but like most Seattle humans, he carried sophisticated communication technology with him. His new global positioning system, radio collar, was designed to send out a text message whenever he came into a cell phone coverage area to report to biologists his wanderings over the previous 32 hours. No longer did city people trumpet human dominion by killing animals in a celebratory manner, yet in some ways, human power over animals was greater than it had ever been. Once back in the wild, the cougar and his conspecifics had no refuge from the development that threatened their habitat. A century and a half of sorting animals had transformed the city, but had not eliminated the complexities of human-animal relations in the city, where domestic still blended with wild, where human blended with animal, where livestock blended with pet. As humans have walked the hills and shorelines and towns of Puget Sound, as they have moved through the streets, backyards, businesses, and houses of Seattle since its founding, non-human animals of all sorts have never been distant. The city is more than human. Non-human animals have witnessed the same history humans saw, looked for opportunities to thrive, aided humans in countless ways, and thwarted human plans. As Seattleites gave form to their city, animals played a crucial role. Seattleites lived in an immense clear-cut, shorn of its ancient trees, first by humans and their animal allies, then by mechanical means. They drive roads made wide enough for horse-drawn vehicles, since newcomers never imagined traveling by canoe and by foot as the area's Duwamish residents had done for millennia. They walk streets with few fences, since first cows and then dogs were banned from roaming the commons. These urban forms, these wide unfenced streets, these hills shorn of trees, are the legacy of decades of struggle over which animals belonged where. As Seattleites asserted power through relations of property, animals were key. Sorting animals helped define Seattle as a Euro-American space. It helped define some neighborhoods as white and middle class. It helped define the city as modern and benevolent. Cattle and other livestock were crucial in newcomers' claims to Salish lands on Puget Sound. In saying land had to be cultivated to be owned, newcomers expressed the view that their form of agriculture, dependent as it was on the labor of animals, was the only appropriate use of land. The Hudson Bay's company cattle that William Ptolemy introduced to Puget Sound helped dispossess Wahalku and other Salish people of much of their land. Decades later, as wealthier whites gained the financial means to dispense with backyard livestock, they deemed the presence of such livestock incompatible with middle-class urban respectability. Private restrictive covenants in neighborhoods throughout the city, bolstered by Federal Housing Administration regulations, made the absence of livestock an essential part of the white middle-class vision of urban living. Yet there have always been some people who found ways to keep livestock in the city, and indigenous people still fish for salmon in Seattle's waters. The sorting of animals is never simple and never settled. This book began with the paradox of the pet food dish. Beloved animals are fed the flesh of distant, unseen animals. It ends with the paradoxical effects of this distancing. Since sorting hid the worst suffering of animals in distant factory farms, in recent decades it has proved to have two contradictory effects. It allows such utilitarian relations to intensify, hidden from the view of most city dwellers. And it also eliminated the childhood familiarity with using and killing animals, allowing more adults to question utilitarian relations with animals altogether. And so, some Seattleites have struggled to resolve the contradictions of urban benevolence and the use in two distinct ways. Some, such as vegans and animal rights activists, have challenged hidden utilitarian relations with animals by challenging the very practice of using animals. Others, such as backyard livestock keepers and urban fishers, challenge the need to hide use at all. None of these groups has anything like majoritarian numbers of urban pet keepers or urban meat eaters. Yet, their attitudes and practices reflect and shape the thinking of many city people more broadly. They show that far from resolving issues of how to live with animals, efforts at sorting only point up the contradictions. And so, we cannot tell the history of Seattle or other cities without including animals. Urban dwellers live with the legacy of these decades of sorting animals. They live among the physical forms the history produced. The forest clear-cut, the roads built, the buildings erected, the fences removed. They live with the legal systems it created, European property systems, restrictions on urban livestock. They live with the urban benevolence and use, abhorrence at visible harm to animals amid increasing harm to distant animals. Because of animals' importance as friends, as property, and as symbols, people have continually sorted animals as a way of asserting power over people, over places, and over animals. The same economic and cultural forces that allow greater control and exploitation of distant livestock also allow greater spending on urban pets, greater desire to keep them confined, to create respectable middle-class homes, and greater need for cats and dogs to fill the social niches left first by vanishing livestock and then by an absence of children. Yet, differing views among humans and animals' own actions have ensured that sorting was never absolute, and that the city remained remained blended. By including animals in the urban story, we can better pursue an honest, respectful relationship with all the animals we share the planet with. The distinctions made in the sorted city between human and animal, domestic and wild, pet and livestock serve useful purposes, but they are far from inevitable, impermeable, or unchanging. In seeing the blending as well as the sorting, we open up new possibilities of connection to other animals. And living with distinctions as blended and making life choices while cognizant that these categories are not inevitable but created, not impermeable but porous, we open up new possibilities of connection to other humans who may have. In writing these distinctions as blended and telling stories that show how these categories break down upon close inspection, we include animals in the history we helped shape. They helped shape. History does not afford us any neat lessons on how to live in this present moment. It is, as Heraclitus had it, a river we cannot step in twice, because it is ever changing. And yet, in contemplating this animal history that is often hidden, we can perhaps see the present world more clearly. Keeping this history in mind may help us reach a more honorable place among other animals. The suffering of horses was evident when they slipped on rain-slicked hills or broke through planking. The harm automobiles cause to distant animals and distant ecologies might come more readily to mind if we think back to those tired horses. The lies of cows in distant dairies, steers in distant feedlots, pigs and chickens in distant buildings seem more present and concerning if we imagine them as vividly as people once saw cows that grazed at Green Lake, or the pigs that ate restaurant swill at South Park. There is no innocence in our relations with other animals, enmeshed as we are in a nature where life exists at the expense of other life, and committed as we are, in varying degrees, to a human culture that depends on travel, building, and consuming, on communicating across distance, and on living until we are old. Yet attention to this history allows a mindful respect for all the animals with whom we share the city, and the planet each day on how to live among them.